Hey guys, so I know this video is almost a week late, but still I'm going to teach you guys how to make a simplified version of this dress. This is actually a Berta style pattern, so if you want to make the real one, I'll put the link down below, but I'm going to make kind of a simplified version out of a jersey fabric. So I'm going to split this tutorial into 4 basic steps, I guess. Making the pattern, making the bodice, making the skirt, and then sewing the two of them together. So let's get started. So to make your pattern, you're going to need 4 measurements. You're going to need the topmost measurement of where you want your dress to end. Then you're going to want where you want the bodice to end, so your waist. You're going to want the height that you want your dress to be. You can take that either from the front between the two or along your side. That's going to be, or should be, fairly close to the same thing. You can take an average if they're a little bit different. Then what you're going to do is you're going to make the pattern for the bodice first. You're going to take your top measurement and you're going to divide it by 2 and take away 1 extra inch. You're going to do the same thing for your waist measurement. Then for how tall you're going to make that pattern piece, you are going to actually double the height that you wanted, since this dress is going to have so many gathers. It should look something like this. This is out of newspaper, obviously not proper any sort of pattern paper, but you get the general idea with the shape. That should be kind of like a trapezoid. Now for the skirt, what you're going to do is you're going to take your waist measurement again, but this time you're going to multiply it by 2, and you're going to take the length measurement, which is your last measurement that you need of how long you want the skirt to be, and you're just going to keep that measurement the way it is. I have a drawing of how these should basically look, so you can check and make sure that it looks like it lined up. So now you're ready to start making your bodice. This is probably the most complicated part of this dress, so I'm actually going to include a little bit of footage here and there from when I was making it. So now that you have your pattern, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to cut out your bodice pieces. You're actually going to cut out 2 of those pattern pieces, so if you have a fabric that has some sort of a pattern on it, like mine did, you can keep in mind which one you want to be the front and which one you want to be the back. After you have them both cut out, you're going to hem the top. It should look something like this. It's just like a narrow hem, just to keep the top looking nice. So now, before you can actually gather your bodice, obviously you have to make some sort of stitches to do that. You're basically going to sew one straight down the middle of the pattern piece, and you're not going to backstitch or anything on a really long stitch length, just all the way down. And then along both the sides, you're going to do the same thing, but you're going to do 2 lines right next to each other. I have a clip that shows you what that looked like. The 2 rows along the sides and the 1 along the middle. And then I'm going to gather them now and then show you what it looks like. Basically what you do is you turn to the bottom and you take the loose thread and you just pull on it. In case it doesn't go without saying, when you're gathering it, you're going to try and make everything as even as possible, and you're going to get it back down to the length that it's actually supposed to be. So mine was supposed to be 9 inches tall, so even though it was a little bit more than 20, I think, to start with, I gathered it up enough so that it was the right height on each line that I sewed on each thread. Once you have all of those gathers done how you want them, you're going to tie off the ends. So I would use a needle to pull through the front thread to the back and tie them both together. That way nothing comes undone. Then you're going to sew the sides together like a normal sewing seam. You're just going to do right sides together, but I actually have another clip that shows you how to line up the sides with the 2 rows of stitching. So what you do next is you sew the sides together. You can kind of see on the back how I have 2 rows of stitching. You're going to pin them together and sew the side seams right along the middle of them. That way all your gathers will stay exactly how you wanted them. Once you've done that, your side seams should look like this. Basically, I've trimmed mine down and kept one of my rows of stitching on it actually, but it's just a normal seam except it has a lot more fabric in it. The whole thing basically looks like this. It looks a little weird when you're not wearing it, but it's basically like a tube top, and it's stretchy because it's jersey, and if you did all your measurements, it should fit good. If, however, it doesn't fit quite the way you want it, if one of the parts is too loose, what you can do is, for example, if it's the top, this is the side seam, you can start sewing here, backstitch just at the top, and sew like a diagonal down, however far you want, however far in you think you need it, and don't backstitch the bottom, that way you can gather that. It probably won't look quite as nice as the sides, but if it's between it's sliding down or the gather's looking a little bit different at the top, I would probably go ahead and make it a little bit tighter. So now that you're done with the bodice, the hard part's over. The skirt's really easy by comparison. What you're going to do before you start sewing though is you're going to fold the top of it in half, so lengthwise you're going to fold it in half and mark the middle point. Then you're going to make another gathering stitch along the top. That's going to take it from being twice as long as you need it to the right length. So that's the same way as when you were making the bodice, just a long stitch, don't backstitch, and gather it up to the length you need. Then you're going to sew up the side seam, which is actually in the back, so whatever you want to call it, but right sides together, your normal seam allowance, and just all the way down. Then what you're going to do, last part of making the skirt, is you're going to hem the bottom. You can do that if you want, just the same way that you did the bodice. You can make it a little bit wider. I mean, it's basically up to you. Okay guys, so you're almost done. In order to sew your bodice to your skirt, first you're going to turn your bodice inside out. Then you're going to put it on top of your skirt. So it's going to be kind of like a tube going over the skirt all the way around. This is finished, obviously. I have a clip that I'm going to show you in a second of what it looked like before. But this is where your little halfway mark that you made comes in handy, because you're going to line up the back of the skirt with the back of the bodice, and you're going to line up the front with that mark you made. That way your gathers will be fairly even, and you'll be able to kind of adjust them so there's not one section that's super gathered and another that's barely gathered at all. But basically it looks like this, and the skirt shows in the bottom. That way when you sew along this edge here, which you can see that I have pins on it, I've already lined it all up the way I want it, then you'll be able to turn it around and it'll look correct. So after you pinned it together, you're basically just going to sew along that line. So just right where it was gathered. You can sew a little bit under it if you want, or you could have done on the skirt, you could have done the 2 rows and then taken the bottom one out. It's all personal preference. The last step you have to do is I actually added elastic to one side because the skirt's rather heavy since it's jersey, it's a heavy fabric, and you don't want it pulling the bodice down since I didn't actually add any straps to this one. So the super mathematical way to decide how much elastic you need is to put it around your waist and pull it as tight as you want it to where it stays in place, and then just cut it and mark a few like halfway points, quarters, and line those up on that seam, and then just sew along. There's a lot of tutorials online for how to do elastic as well, for how to sew that, and I won't get into that because this video will get a whole lot longer if I try and explain something else. But basically, you're done! So the way the dress is now, you can actually still slide the gathers around. I'll kind of show you how that works. Since only the tops and the bottoms are anchored, you can actually slide them so that on the front there's a few more around the top since there's a lot more area to cover there. If you don't want them to slide around, you can actually, I didn't do this, but you can add like a piece of fabric, like a strip, going all along the back of that middle, and you can just sew from the front and sew it down right on top of the line of stitches that you already did, and that way it wouldn't slide if that's something that bothers you. Also, if you want to add a strap like the inspiration photo had, you would basically just take the length you wanted it, if you wanted to be a halter and top, and you would take that length, take the width that you want it, and I would multiply it by 4 actually, because you can take it, and if you have a strip of fabric like this, and you do right sides together and you make a tube, and then you gather it, you would actually want it to be 4 times as long. But you can kind of experiment around with that to make sure that it doesn't end up being too thick. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll see you again hopefully tomorrow, because hopefully I'll actually make my video on time. Why do I never make my video on time? Bye guys, hope you enjoyed this video.